Chapter 23. An alliance between Dalmasca and the Empire. Reason told her it was the only course, yet she feared she could not bear the shame. Her people hated the Empire, they would not accept this. But as she trudged through the snow, squeezing her shivering frame and grinding her teeth with worry, Ash felt as though she had no choice, and could not banish from her mind the many reasons she had led her cortege out into the snow-covered forest that morning. Balthier's words refused to leave her, and the occasional hum of the stone, so similar in thought and presence to her name, wore on her patience with such heaviness that she at last resolved to do something about it, though at the time she had no idea what. She had at last decided to seek the Grand Kiltias's wisdom on the subject, though she had gone to him with the fear that he may have nothing to offer her, and soon had it confirmed. He had indeed heard whispers of such a weapon, but the word Nethysite held no meaning for him. He equated it with an ancient power, the Christ, he called it, which King Wraithwall had wielded during the wars that preceded the Great Peace of the Galtian Alliance. Ancient writings had described Wraithwall's remarkable ability to allay the fears of others, to gain their trust, to convince them, and this, the Grand Kiltias said, could aid her far more than any Nethysite. How to master the Christ remained a mystery, however, and she left the cathedral no better off than she had been when she arrived, so she thought. Though the word Nethysite had never been used in reference to it, a stone of some importance did exist in Wraithwall's time, one bound to his blood and divided into 3 pieces. The Grand Kiltias had informed her that the great sword with which Wraithwall cut the stone had been destroyed, so that the 3 shards may never be divided further, but a second sword remained hidden within the Galtian shrine some distance into the forest. This shrine had been built on the mountain after the conclusion of the great conference that ended with the forming of the Galtian Alliance, a monument to peace and those who would pursue it. This blade, the Grand Kiltias said, had been gifted to the Grand Kiltias of Wraithwall's time, and bore in it the power to destroy Nethysite. The Grand Kiltias had always suspected that the purpose of such an act would be to break the old alliance once the line of the dynastic king ended, and to then forge a new one with elected royalty. But when Ashalia described to him the wrath held within the Nethysite, he felt certain that Wraithwall had left the sword intact as a means of destroying the power of Nethysite, should it ever fall into the wrong hands. Why he would entrust the power to destroy the instrument of his greatness to another and not his own progeny, neither could say, but Ash had seen her path clear in that moment, and thus set out a plan for the next day. Her cortege awoke that morning with the intention of returning to the Strahl, but she had informed them of their new goal, ignoring the groans she received and insisting that they start out at once. Almid had departed, insisting that he needed no assistance in eluding the Imperial fleet that hung portentously overhead, and thus far none had witnessed any indication that he had exaggerated his skills. The princess's only hesitance came in bringing Monty along, for she feared that putting him in any danger could have dire consequences, even if no harm came to him. He predicted this, however, and made his insistence in coming along more than clear, leaving no room for debate. The trek proved not as trying as what they had gone through on their way up the mountain, but this time they did not go with hopes of peace, and for that it seemed all the more burdensome. Ashalia's mind reeled, tormented by the thought of bringing the power to destroy Nethysite against Lamont, though she did not speak of her thoughts. Should she become Queen of Dalmasca now, powerless as she was, she could protect nothing, and if she could find no opportunity to gain more power, her only hope lied in depriving Arcadia of its own. She did not want war, but she had grown to doubt Monty's ability to sway his brother's opinions. This, she told herself, would avert war, it would prevent Vane from destroying Dalmasca, and convince him that treating would prove to his benefit. She trudged on silently, noting that Balthier went along this time with a far less begrudging countenance, though Francesca's agitation seemed to only increase with the snow, much to the bemusement of the others. Before long, Ash had taken to following in Bosch's footsteps, for he ploughed through the snow with a stallion-like hardiness which she could not ever hope to possess, but which she figured she may as well take advantage of. Vaughn and Monty bounded, always a few yards ahead of the adults, eager to explore and often wandering some distance off course before being ushered back by Penello, who hovered near them protectively when not joining in their misadventures. Monty took to the rocky path with the skill of the native sheep that watched them from afar, but Vaughn seemed to have a streak of bad luck where ice was concerned, for at every attempt to mount a stone he slipped back into the banks of snow at its base, thus providing much amusement for his companions. Monty tried to help him, but soon gave up and left him to Penello's taunting. Bosch quickly took notice of the princess's proximity, but his concern for her brooding countenance soon outweighed his relief in her restored trust, and when he felt sure that Monty had ventured out of earshot, he quietly addressed her.
"Why so troubled? All has gone well so far."
With a sigh, she answered in as unimposing a tone as she could muster,
"I feel like I'm selling my soul, crawling to Vane, promising I'll behave if he gives me the chance. I never thought I would buy peace for this much shame." "Shame perhaps for you and for me,"
Bosch replied,
"but for Dalmasca it is hope. And you can just accept this, can you?"
She bit back.
"Not easily," he admitted with a sigh, "but this war is more important than my pride, or yours, for that matter."
She took in a grounding breath and tried to smile.
"There are times when you sound just like Bolthier, you know." "I'm sure you mean that as a compliment,"
Bolthier injected, gleaning a smirk out of Bosch. Ash returned her gaze to the snow, finding comfort in its resemblance to the sand of her homeland, pale, smooth, retaining her footprints with effortless perfection. It occurred to her then that Bosch likely found comfort in it as well, for Landis lay hidden beneath thick snow for nearly half of each year. What strength it must take, she thought, for him maintain such optimism after so many years in foreign lands, after so many tribulations, after so many defeats. By her measure, Bosch had abandoned hope for honor after Vane's ruse at Nalbina, yet never did he forget his knightly vows. If he could protect but one person from war's horror, then he would bear any shame, he would bear it proudly. The longer she studied him, the clearer his sentiment became. He could not defend his home, what was shame to him? But still she could not muster such virtues within herself, for they soon came upon the great stone shrine to which the Grand Kiltias had directed her, and she saw in it the proud heritage of her country, of her family, and could not fight off the overpowering sense of honor that it instilled in her. It stood atop a modest hill, its architecture high and lofty, reminiscent of the dynastic king's tomb, for they had very likely been built within mere years of each other. Vaughn and Penello, too, experienced the rush of pride at first laying eyes on it, and stopped in their tracks to gaze upon it in wonder, Monty still and awed between them. Ash proceeded forward to better observe the vicinity, curious of the many small tents that had been pitched at the base of the low hill, shelter for travelers who dared not take rest on holy ground. The area at first appeared devoid of life, save for a few shrubs and evergreen trees, but the presence of white creatures was soon felt by all, Fran pointing out, thanks to her exceptional hearing capabilities, several pristine hares nearby, as well as a powdery white owl perched on a high corner of the temple and a well-camouflaged fox in the distance. The group decided to take rest for the night and venture into the shrine the next morning, though reaching this decision took a lengthy discussion on what exciting wonders might await them within, the children, of course, being eager to explore such things, but ultimately unable to convince their companions that the expedition could not wait until tomorrow. But the wait did not please Ash, either, though she knew it best to explore ancient dangers in the light of day, and while the others slept, she found no respite, eventually resigning herself to a breath of fresh air. Exiting the tent, however, she found that she was not the only one too restless to lie awake, for Monty sat on the front steps of the temple, his back to her, his eyes focused upwards at the dimly moonlit Arcadian fleet. Ash briefly hesitated in approaching him, but soon realized that she may not get another chance to ask him what she had been aching to ask for some time now, and decided that she had better act upon it while she could.
"Lamont?"
she asked plainly, feeling her heart tense up when he turned to her.
"Are you all right?"
"Fine," he said with a small smile.
"Just couldn't sleep?" "Neither could I." "Because of the fleet or because of the Nethysite?" "You're starting to sound like Bolthir." He smiled. "My deepest apologies. Do I really seem so affected by it?" "Not always. I'm actually kind of glad I'm not the only one." At this she cast a somewhat suspicious glance on him, but he quickly comprehended her wariness and expounded politely, "Sometimes I think I can hear it." A pause fell between them, and she spoke softly. "Power can do that." "Power?" he replied with a thoughtful nod. "I don't think it has much use, though," she went on, sitting beside him. "Other than proving who I am." "I suppose that's for the best," he agreed. "Perhaps." Another pause, as he focused on the ground and she searched for something, anything, appropriate to say. With a small, childish tone of guilt, he at last broke the silence, his eyes far off in awkward embarrassment. "I'm sorry I've caused you so much trouble." "No, no," she insisted with a quick, frantic shake of her head. "You've done us far more good than bad." He nodded toward the fleet, his voice moderately accusing. "Is that good?" "That's inevitable," she assured him. "Then is it bad that I want to go home?" A sigh overcame her attempt to ease the situation. He had caught her off guard, as she now knew him as prone to doing, but even had she anticipated his feelings on their current circumstances, she had little aptitude for comfort, and found herself fearful of offending. "I don't mean to patronize you or insult your brother," she said slowly, "but I worry about what might become of you if you go back." "I don't think he'd hurt me," Lamont said gently. "I mean, I can't know anything for certain these days, but Drace and Gabranth wouldn't give him the chance. You don't have to worry. They take good care of you." He nodded. "Despite my best efforts." "Bosch isn't exactly obliging where his brother is concerned," she admitted. "I wish I could meet him." "I don't think it would make much difference," said Monty. "He's just like Bosch." "He can't be." A moment of stunned silence fell then, for though Ash had not spoken with exceptional volume, the severity of her tone proved enough to suggest anger in such an accusation, and Lamont had intended no such thing. Quickly regaining her wits, she calmly added, "I mean, I know they're brothers, but they can't be very alike if they hate each other." He asked at her hesitance. "Right," she said, her tone dulled. "That's what I always thought," Monty explained, "and I have tried to see it otherwise, believe me,
but that's just how it is. I thought meeting Bosch might explain Gabranth, but I guess there's more to it than that. What is there to explain?
She pressed, and then hoping to not sound so childishly nosy,
if you don't mind me asking.
It wasn't that she truly wished to know all there was to know about Gabranth, but she had come to realize that there had to be something good in him if he could raise such a kind child, and if she could only come to understand this one aspect of his being, perhaps she could grow to understand him as Bosch did. However, she knew the danger of hope, and she tried her best to bed down her curiosity for the good of her own heart.
I'm not sure, really,
Monty answered with a thoughtful expression of puzzlement.
Sometimes he's just so sad. Sad. You know, kind of serious, gets quiet sometimes. But only since the last year or so.
Her voice lowered.
Do you know why?
He hesitated.
I think it had something to do with Dalmasca. You don't mind, do you? No, tell me. Well, I got older, and my father decided Drace could handle things on her own, so he reassigned Gabranth. Judge Zak died at Nabudis, so the army was a little short. Anyway, I don't know for sure, but I think he was assigned to the Nalbina Treaty. He led some troops in securing the border, I know, but he and Drace only talk about Nalbina when they think I'm not listening. I asked her once, and she told me not to bring it up, especially not to him.
At her silence, he glanced up to her, big brown eyes somewhat shrouded by hopeful uncertainty.
Bash didn't do it, right?
She nodded.
Right.
More silence descended as his eyes turned to the ground, focused with such intensity as none would ever expect from one so young. He shifted slightly, his breath still, and spoke almost shamefully.
Vane was there.
Ash looked at him with subtle bewilderment, praying that he might read her sympathy over her anger. He turned his eyes upward, gazing out at the distance as though forcing himself to see some humor in the situation.
It's amazing what you can overhear in a palace, he said.
Another pause, and then,
I try not to think about it. Gabranth assimilated to the country that conquered his,
she replied slowly, her voice mildly mournful.
Helping it take down others, can't have been easy for him.
Monty nodded.
He hates this war, all wars, but this one.
She nodded as well.
I know. I suppose what I don't understand is why they can't just suck it up and get along. They both seem reasonable enough. If it were that easy, they'd have moved on by now. I doubt either of us knows the whole story. Good point,
he admitted.
Maybe I just want to make it up to him, Gabranth, I mean. After all my family did to his home, he's never held it against me. How could he?
She asked reassuringly.
You are not responsible for you family's actions. I wish it were that simple. It's not fair that he should have to do this. He's the only person who's never tried to use me.
Now she looked directly at him.
You really think that? I know it,
he said, meeting her eyes.
It's not that I'm upset or anything, you're using me for something good, just like I'm using you. The same goes for Vane and my father, Drace, and Bolthier, all of them. I can understand that. But sometimes...
He shrugged, turning his gaze away once more.
It's just nice to not have anything expected of you. I see,
she replied, her eyes falling to the ground as well. A brief moment of silence settled between them, and she spoke again.
My mother never used me, I think because she had always been used.
He answered first with a slow nod, and then added,
My father tried not to, but using people was the only thing he ever really understood.
It seemed to dawn on her all too quickly then, Monty had remained in mourning for all the time he had traveled with them, but he did not dare bring it up, knowing his companion's feelings regarding his father's death. She now wished for greater knowledge in the art of providing comfort, but no thought came to her, no action or assurance struck her as being particularly useful. At length, she offered the only words she could muster that might convey her intent.
I was about your age when she died. Does it ever go away?
He asked quietly.
No. But it gets easier.
Ash realized then that she had never outright discussed losing her mother. Rassler had known better than to mention it, and her bodyguards had avoided it with well-honed skill, and she had certainly never dared to bring it up with her father. The pain had always been too near for him to speak of. She began to wonder if this had simply been because she had never known anyone who shared the loss. Vaughn and Penello had definitely gone through something similar, but they did not lose a queen, they did not see the weight of a country placed solely on their father's shoulders, and they did not feel the pressure of their people to emulate their mother's every quality in her absence. The way Monty spoke of his experience, he seemed to predict each emotion within her, and as she described her own dealings at the time, his expression revealed that he, too, found the similarities of their views rather astounding. He told her that Vane did not speak of his own mother, and that he had always known better than to speak of Monty's for fear of worsening their father's grief, and for a moment Ash felt as though peace had at last stepped within her reach. She could actually relate to this Arcadian, he actually felt the same things she had felt, and if she could come to understand this, then surely her people could, too. However, she soon saw the flaw in this. Arcadia had not suffered in the same way that Dalmasca had, quite the opposite, in fact. If Dalmasca had lost its mother, then surely Arcadia had killed her, and Ashalia knew that to convince a throng of angry people that blame and vengeance would do them no service would indeed prove a difficult task. She wished she could show all of Dalmasca the humanity of their enemy, the guilt and occasional justification that plagued Arcadia's citizens, but she feared she may simply have to bear their anger, for she knew it to be for their own good. She knew they could never comprehend this. Lamont's gaze remained steady, unwavering. Ash tried to smile, to ignore years of hatred and terror of this boy's heritage, to forget that he had been bred for war, just as all of the Solidaires had. He spoke with such a human quality that she came to despise herself for second-guessing it, but she had to maintain her skepticism, for 2 years now, it had kept her alive. He did seem truly oblivious to this, though. Unlike her, Monty let his guard down, he did not regard this as having anything to do with politics. He somberly related what he could of his opinion of his mother, the elegance of his enunciation sturdily masking his age, though she had learned to see beyond it now. Secretly, she wished to embrace him, for she herself had wanted nothing more at his age. Ashalia's mother had suffered a recurring illness since early adulthood, which physicians attributed to an experience in her teen years that caused her to nearly drown. Though she seemed healthy enough day to day, every so often she would become winded, let out a gasp and take in a deep breath, and then attempt to pass it off as nothing. When her lungs at last gave out, the sorrow the princess and her father experienced proved somewhat lessened than what it might have been, for both had known that the queen's condition had worsened in her last year, and both had witnessed the remorse she felt when she could no longer take her chocobo for long rides through the oasis, or walk through the palace gardens. Her death seemed more a relief than a tragedy. Monty had a slightly different understanding of death. The celebrations of his birth overshadowed his mother's funeral. When he grew old enough to understand, he was told that she died bearing him. Some people, he noticed, could not meet his eyes when they spoke of it, his father especially. When he asked Vane for clarification, he explained that every royal marriage was a contract, and that his mother had exchanged her life for his, and that he shouldn't ask about it anymore, so he didn't. The difference, however, came in that Ashalia had lost only one parent at an early age. Monty had lost both. He told of his father's better attributes, the good times they had spent together, the admittedly hilarious things he had told Monty in times of joy. It pained her to see Emperor Gramus in such a different light, but somehow she felt that she needed to. There had to be humanity in her enemy if there was to be humanity in her. When it occurred to her that Monty may soon become her enemy, she found herself unable to reconcile such a thought with her own intuition, and thus ignored the possibility entirely, speaking with him as she would with any other until just a few hours before dawn. Noting the time and what lied ahead of them, they decided that it would be best to sleep a bit before the sun rose, even if both still found sleep impossible, which they didn't. The group entered the temple the next morning with expectations of puzzles, traps, and all other assortment of obstacles that they had met in Raithwall's tomb, but this shrine proved far friendlier, designed to welcome visitors and provide sanctuary to those seeking peace. It stood in honor of the Galtian alliance, the last era of tranquility known to Ivalice, the pinnacle of the world's harmony, a calm brought on by Raithwall, the great and amiable dynast king. Ash could not help but flatter herself that this building commended her family, her heritage, and though its innards proved rather boring, she found the pride it instilled in her nothing less than enthralling. The others, however, made little attempt to mask their disappointment, Vaughn and Penello inspecting every painting and statue for some secret, and Bolthir and Fran quickly letting their guard down and following the princess with weary complacency. Only his paranoia where Ashalia's safety was concerned sustained Bosch's interest, and Monty appeared fascinated by the historical treasure trove the temple provided him, for it had been rare that his father would allow him to delve too deeply into the triumphs of his supposed enemies. Before long, they had reached the center of the building, a small square room that held at its center a stone tablet bearing carvings in praise of King Raithwall. Ash struggled to make sense of the inscription, finding her knowledge of the ancient Dalmascan language decidedly lacking, but wondering how it could have degenerated so drastically since her days of translation in the tomb. It struck her several minutes into the pathetic attempt that several of the letters, not entire words, but just a letter here and there, had been carved upside down.
"Thank God,"
Bolthir quipped upon hearing her explanation.
"The last thing Dalmasca needs is an illiterate queen." "Don't make me turn Fran on you again,"
Ash warned.
"Do they say anything?"
asked Vaughn, looking over the great slab of stone. The princess had received the same thought, to read only the upside-down letters and see if they formed any words, but she could not decipher their meaning, if they indeed had one.
"I don't think so,"
she answered, running her fingers over the stone with defeat.
"Then why turn them over?"
asked Penello.
"Maybe the whole thing's upside down,"
Vaughn suggested with a groan.
"That's actually not a bad idea,"
said Bosch. Ash nodded.
"Let's flip it."
It proved not too difficult a feat in the care of many hands, and in a matter of minutes they had lifted the stone from the depression in the floor that held it and inverted it completely. Before Ash could re-examine it, however, it sank several inches deeper into its setting that it had when right side up, triggering a section of stonework on the far wall to draw back and slide off to the side. Satisfied with the ease of their victory, they promptly followed their new path. The door led to a short, cramped passageway, which in turn led to yet another small, square room, exactly like the one preceding it, only devoid of any objects.
"What's so important about this?"
Vaughn asked.
"Maybe we missed something,"
Monty replied. Fran stepped farther into the chamber, surveying it carefully with keen eyes and ears.
"There must be something we're meant to see."
Bolthier followed her, the others venturing to the center of the room as well.
"So why can't we see it?"
he asked. A small sound escaped from the floor, then, as they passed to the far side of the room, a scrape, as one stone emits when dragged across another, faint enough to earn itself no echo, but loud enough to be noticed. The group went silent, carefully observing their surroundings, and then all at once the floor gave way with a monstrous creak, shifting like a stone platform balanced on a single, central support. They fell from their feet in an instant, sliding down the ramp along with a good deal of dust and loose rocks until they hit the ground below, falling from the stone platform, rudely but safely deposited in a hidden chamber beneath the temple. As they recovered, however, they found themselves unable to do anything but watch helplessly as the upper floor raised back up without them, the absence of their weight setting it back on balance and allowing it to effectively seal off any escape.